Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. And in today's episode, we have some trades to react to. None accomplished by the Philadelphia Phillies. And the question is, are the Phillies overvaluing their potential trade chips? We'll discuss on today's episode.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space. I've been on air with 97.5 The Fanatic on the radio here in Philly, talking all Philly sports for 5 years now. I've been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 seasons of Phillies baseball, and I've been the host of Locked On Phillies for 3 seasons now as well. Please make sure you're rating, reviewing, hitting that subscribe button on the YouTube channel so that you get notifications when new episodes are posted. That subscribe button really helps me out here on Locked On Phillies too. So it's the number one way to say that you enjoy the content. So please try and do that. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Now, a quick aside before we get into today's episode, because we're going to talk about Kyle Tucker being traded. We're going to talk about Garrett Crochet being traded. We're going to talk about the Phillies making neither of these deals and trying to figure out exactly how they didn't. But real quick, I haven't posted in a couple of days. Had some family stuff going on. Unfortunately, had a death in the family, and I'm going to be traveling for the funeral this coming week. So we are in our off-season scheduling as normal. I'll try and get episodes out for you, but I hope you understand that's why the posting is going to be a little sporadic. But we'll still keep you up to date on the big stuff and get as many episodes out as I can given the circumstances. So I appreciate you bearing with me through this time. Now, let's get back to the baseball. I just wanted to make that mention. But so Kyle Tucker gets moved. And we haven't had a chance to talk about it yet, but Kyle Tucker gets traded from the Houston Astros to the Chicago Cubs. An interesting move there because Cody Bellinger is a guy that has been talked about, and now that's a guy you're looking at and saying, okay, cool, he's probably available. But Kyle Tucker, it's more interesting because the Philadelphia Phillies made an offer. Now, the offer that the Cubs made to get the services of Kyle Tucker, a strong young outfielder, multi-time All-Star, and they traded Isaac Paredes, Hayden Wesneski, and Cam Smith. So Paredes, middle of the line guy. Wesneski is not anyone like crazy special on the mound, a pitcher. And then Smith is a young prospect, 14th overall pick for the Chicago Cubs last July. So not anything crazy there as far as the package is concerned. And Phillies fans, what the immediate thought was, why did the Phillies not match that package? And actually, it's funny. You rarely get this, I feel like. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I feel like sometimes you'll hear, like, the Phillies were also in on, or the Phillies made an offer for, or the Phillies made an offer to when a free agent goes somewhere else or a trade gets done with another team and you don't end up winning the sweepstakes for whatever player you are bidding for, whether it be trade or free agency. But it's rare that you hear the actual details of the offer. At least I feel like it's rare. You don't always hear, like, the Phillies offered this, and this to the Astros for Kyle Tucker. But in this instance, we did get a report of the Philadelphia Phillies trade package that they offered for Kyle Tucker. Now, the Phillies reportedly offered a trade package that included Nick Castellanos and Alec Bohm, moving both of those guys for Kyle Tucker, which that's interesting to me. Moving both Castellanos and Bohm, that would be losing 2 starting spots for one. I guess the Phillies feel confident, right? The one thing I keep coming back to is the Philadelphia Phillies seem to feel confident that they can acquire somebody in free agency, Alex Bregman, who could step into the third base spot in place of Alec Bohm, because the Castellanos-Tucker thing would basically be 1-for-1. Kyle Tucker would take over in right field. Nick Castellanos would move in that trade. I get that part, but then Alec Bohm also being included. Now you lose a starting spot. I guess the Phillies are just trying to become the Houston Astros East, but obviously not going to happen as this Kyle Tucker deal gets done. And also, like, we're going to talk about another interesting trade offer because Garrett Crochet goes to the Red Sox. There's another interesting package that we got the report of in the wake of that Red Sox trade that we're going to talk about later in this episode. But let's focus on this real quick, because to me, Bohm Castellanos seems to outweigh Paredes, Wisniewski, and Smith. Now, the only difference is the Astros would not be getting younger in that deal. It would have been a 2-for-1, so no prospect. So the Philadelphia Phillies would have had to move a prospect. And some people are saying, why did the Philadelphia Phillies just not add in a prospect there, one of their top guys, to go get a guy like Kyle Tucker who could really help this team? That's a fair question. I think it really is a fair question if you're serious about winning. Now, the tough thing if you're Dave Dombrowski is you can't move Aiden Miller because he's the future of your position at third base. You can't move Justin Crawford because he's the future of the outfield. At least you believe him to be. And you can't move Andrew Painter because he's the future of the rotation, or at least a future member of the rotation. Like, those are 3 do not touch prospects. And outside of that, there's a pretty big drop-off with the Philadelphia Phillies system. So I'd imagine that Houston asked for either Miller, Crawford, or Painter. And those are non-starters for the Philadelphia Phillies, or at least should be non-starters. I'm not saying that they have reported that. I'm saying those should be non-starters for the Philadelphia Phillies, unless the trade is somebody remarkable. And Kyle Tucker is a really good player. But when you're giving up 2 major league starters who have both been all-stars in their career, in Bohm and Castellanos, throwing in a top prospect with that, I kind of understand why the Philadelphia Phillies chose not to do that. But it's also tricky to me because 2 all-star players for 1. I get that the Astros wanted to get younger, but there's this growing sense around baseball that the Philadelphia Phillies evaluation of what they could get back for Alec Bohm is an overshot. They are overvaluing what Alec Bohm is viewed as around baseball. And that's troubling, right? Because my biggest issue with potentially trading Alec Bohm, it's not so much like the Kyle Tucker thing. Like, whatever. Kyle Tucker goes to the Cubs. I don't think the Cubs are true competitors anyway. That's just like them making a move to try and get to a place where they can kind of rebuild. Kyle Tucker's still a younger-ish player. So I'm not like, oh, well, now the Phillies are screwed because they didn't get Kyle Tucker and he went to Chicago. Like, that's not so much the point of this. There are still other options, but they grow thinner by the day as more of these changes happen. But what more importantly I'm looking at is, are the Phillies overvaluing Alec Bohm's potential trade ability, right? When you look at what is happening, it doesn't seem that there's that much interest in Alec Bohm. The Seattle Mariners have seemed to be interested the whole time. The Kansas City Royals have seemed to be somewhat interested, but there were talks about him in a Garrett Crochet trade. That doesn't get done. He was offered in a Kyle Tucker trade. That doesn't get done. And people aren't beating the Phillies' door down to acquire Alec Bohm. Now, why would that be? What is the reasoning for not wanting a 28-year-old all-star starter from this past year, arbitration-eligible player? You got team control. You're going to have near 100 RBIs from him. You're going to have serviceable defense at the hot corner. Here's why, right? Because this is the same reason. It goes back to my initial commentary on the Alec Bohm trade shopping. Why would the Philadelphia Phillies be looking to trade Alec Bohm, right? It doesn't add up. The math doesn't make sense. Contending team, contending player, team control, seems to have more in the tank, like nowhere near his peak yet. Now, I'm not saying he's got like so much more to build on his game, but I'm saying age-wise, he's nowhere near like well, we got to move him now because he's going to start declining. Like, no, he is still, you could strongly argue Alec Bohm, based on age, should be on the upslope in his career. So it's weird that the Philadelphia Phillies, in the position they're in as World Series contenders, would want to move a player like that. And, have you ever seen those deals online for, it could be for whatever. It could be for a car. It could be for a blow dryer. It could be for anything. It's one of those deals that's just like, that's kind of fishy to me. That seems too good to be true. That's kind of the sense that I'm getting with these Alec Bohm situations, right? I think people are looking at that and saying, well, we wouldn't trade that guy in that situation. So what do the Phillies know that we don't? And it seems that all signs point back to the attitude issues. Not that Alec Bohm is a bad clubhouse guy, right? Not that he's like, the Phillies don't like him, right? I think Philadelphia Phillies players really enjoy having Alec Bohm as part of the locker room and part of the team. It's not that. He's not a bad guy, but it's the attitude when dealing with adversity. We first saw it with the I blanking hate this place commentary 2 years ago. And then we saw it this year throughout the season during slumps for Alec Bohm. And I don't think it affects him as a teammate. I think it affects him as an individual player. And people saw that and said, well, dude, we can't have this. You can't perform like this if you're going to take everything this hard. And apparently it's gotten to a place where they can't handle it. And I think other teams have sniffed out that the Phillies are moving on from him because there's this fatal flaw in Alec Bohm's mentality that really diminishes his value as a baseball player. That's the only possible explanation for why they're having such trouble finding a trade partner for Alec Bohm. Now, it doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. It doesn't mean the Seattle Mariners might move one of their best pitchers to come to Philadelphia for an Alec Bohm-led trade package. That's still very much possible. I'm not saying Alec Bohm is untradeable, but I'm saying it very much seems like, and this Kyle Tucker trade and the one they didn't make with the Philadelphia Phillies, again, a 2-for-1 swap. Tucker comes to Philly, Castellanos and Bohm go to Houston. It very much seems like the Phillies have overvalued Alec Bohm, and they're having a tough time creating the opportunities through the trade market that they wanted to this offseason. Again, this isn't 5-alarm fire type territory for the Philadelphia Phillies. They can survive this. If they don't move Bohm, they're still a darn good baseball team. If they don't move Castellanos, still a darn good baseball team. But clearly they want to, and clearly other teams have seen how much they want to. And now you're kind of in a spot where it's okay, the rest of the league is a little wary about trying to acquire this player. And that makes that tough to do. So maybe a miscalculation by Dave Dombrowski. It is still too early to say that definitively. Just thought processes that we're going through as we see some of these trades go down. Now, something else that happens when you see trades go down is sometimes you learn a little bit more about history. And Garrett Crochet was traded. Now, we did the crossover episode about him potentially being a target for the Philadelphia Phillies. He ends up in Boston with the Red Sox. So how does this affect the Phillies? Well, not only is another trade target off the board, but we found out about another offer. And this one, this one's a little bit more impactful, I think, because it's not two guys that I thought the Philadelphia Phillies were interested in trading. We'll talk about it coming up as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But let's talk about FanDuel first, because you got to be ready to tackle the NFL action with FanDuel. They're America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. You'll get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So take that $5, put it on the biggest favorite you can find. Just say, okay, this team is minus $1 million on the money line. Obviously exaggerating there. You place $5, your return might be a penny. But because of this promo from FanDuel, you're going to get $150 back, and then you can use that to bet on everything from props, parlays, futures, money line bets, live bets, everything you want to bet. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, let's talk about this Garrett Crochet deal now. Another one that gets done that the Philadelphia Phillies had some interest, and then it didn't work out. He goes to the Boston Red Sox. And listen, big-time trade for the Boston Red Sox. They offered a lot to get that done. They're going to have to give him an extension to make it make sense. He stays in the American League. This is a very low-impact trade for the Philadelphia Phillies, outside of the fact that they were potentially interested in acquiring the services of Garrett Crochet. If they got him, that would have really helped their baseball team. But a lot of teams are interested in a 25-year-old with 2 years of team control that could sign a long-term extension that had 200 strikeouts and 140-some innings last year. That was going to be a guy that was always in high demand. The Phillies were interested. So were a lot of other teams. They get beat out. That in and of itself is not that big of a deal. It's not. It does kill another option for starting pitching additions, but there are still guys out there that you can go ahead and acquire, whether it's free agency, whether it's trades with another team like Seattle or like Kansas City. But when you see these guys acquired, then stories start to come out about deals that they weren't traded for, just like the Kyle Tucker deal. And we got a report that the Philadelphia Phillies offered Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford at last year's deadline to try and get Garrett Crochet. That's kind of wild, right? That's 2 of your top 3 prospects in a trade for Garrett Crochet. That feels hefty. Now, it's different in season, right? Because you don't want to trade a player. Like if you were to trade Alec Bohm now, you can go out and sign another third baseman. If you were to trade Alec Bohm in season, who are you finding to play third base? You either have to trade for another guy, you'd have to elevate somebody, you'd have to play Edmundo Sosa, you'd have to sign somebody off like waiver. Like it would be much harder to fill your roster out if you moved major league players that you needed in the regular season at the trade deadline. So I understand why the price had to be a little bit higher prospects wise, but that's mind blowing to me. I've had this assumption of what the Philadelphia Phillies see in Aiden Miller and to a lesser extent Justin Crawford. And now I feel like my world's kind of turned upside down, but I'm going to process this right in front of you. Okay. This is how I work through things mentally to figure out why the Phillies would have done this. And you can let me know if this makes sense or not, but this is my thought process. And I think I'm pretty darn good at evaluating why teams do what they do. I've seen a lot of trades over the years. I've seen a lot of signings over the years. I've seen Dave Dombrowski do a lot of stuff over the years, not just in Philadelphia. So what do we know? One, we know Dave Dombrowski does not give a damn about prospects. He's here to build a contender. He will trade who he needs to. He has had criticism in the past for taking other organizations and bankrupting their farm system to build a contender and then leaving when they are no longer a contender with nothing to rebuild with. That is one of the main criticisms of Dave Dombrowski. It may be a harsh criticism, but there are parts of that are fact from places he's been in the past. So that should make you immediately not surprised that he's willing to be aggressive with some of his top prospects that seem like the future of this franchise. But I'm also thinking about the time frame. Remember where we were at the trade deadline and remember where we are now and what has changed. Aiden Miller being included in that deal is weird to me because that feels completely contrary to being comfortable with trading Alec Bohm. Because you move Alec Bohm, you have Aiden Miller in like 2 years at the major league level, you have your third baseman of the future. Everything works out great. I don't want my third baseman of the future to be Alex Bregman for 7 years. I don't. He's 30. I don't want him playing here at 36, 37. That's no knock on him as a player. I'd rather have a young player from in-house that you can have for a long time under team control and spend less money on it. Plus spot with minus money that you can win with. And Aiden Miller seems to be that guy. But if you're worried that this means, well, Aiden Miller's on the table, he could be moved. Even though they're trying to trade Alec Bohm, he's not untouchable. Well, remember, at the time that trade package was offered, ahead of the deadline, we hadn't seen another postseason collapse. We hadn't heard these Alec Bohm is having attitude issues rumors. We haven't seen Rob Thompson sit him in the second game of a postseason series. Like, we hadn't seen any of this occur. This whole Alec Bohm is potentially on the trade block, that was not even a thought in anybody outside of the organization's mind. Now, inside it might have been, but to us, it was not. So when you look at Aiden Miller being included in that deal, I have to assume that has changed, right? I have to assume that now he's off the board. They're not going to move him in a package and then also move Alec Bohm and then just totally say, well, we don't care about the third base position, or we're going to get Alex Bregman on a long-term deal at 30 to spend the next 6 years there. Like, that doesn't seem prudent for the Philadelphia Phillies to do. So that could change, but it's just sometimes I forget, right? Because the Philadelphia Phillies under Dave Dombrowski have not been heavy into moving prospects. They haven't really gone out and said, hey, we don't care about this guy. We're dishing this guy. We're going to dive deep into the minor league system and move. Now, they have moved prospects, and guys like Logan O'Hoppe moving, guys like Mickey Moniak moving. Those are young, potentially good players that are moved for trade pieces in 2022 when the Philadelphia Phillies were fighting to barely make the postseason, right? Remember, that wasn't 2023 that they were moved for Noah Syndergaard and Brandon Marsh, the big returns in those trades. No, you were looking at a situation where the Phils were fighting for the final wild card spot, and then they go on a run, which was great to see. But so Dombrowski has done that. I guess I look so much towards the sustainability of the Philadelphia Phillies. I forget who their president of baseball operations is at his core. Dave Dombrowski is the guy that's here to build a championship team at the major league level, and prospects be damned, he'll do it. So maybe there's more on the table this offseason than we thought. But maybe there's less on the table with the star players that you're looking to trade than we thought. So this is why this is such a sliding scale. People get so worked up from saying like, oh, well, Alec Bohm's value is not what they thought. You can't trade him for anything. You're in a situation where it's going to be very hard to rebuild this team through doing that. Maybe you just run it back because you can't trade him. And everyone gets all in a tizzy over that. And they say similar things about Castellanos, and part of that is because of the money still attached to his contract and the age of the player and the inconsistency. But then you see, okay, well, I didn't expect them to be able to move Aiden Miller. I didn't expect them to be able to, or to want to, I should say, move Aiden Miller or Justin Crawford or, heck, who knows, Andrew Painter. I don't think any of those guys realistically should be traded. But the fact that just a couple months ago in season, they almost moved him for a guy that just got traded, it shows that it's a more realistic potential option than we might think. So there are a lot of things on the table that we don't think of. Like, just think about Jordan Romano, who the Phillies signed as a reliever from the Blue Jays in free agency. We hadn't brought that name up at all. He wasn't on any of the lists I read through. We hadn't previewed anything, hadn't heard him linked to the Phillies at all. And the next thing you know, bang, the Philadelphia Phillies signed him to a one-year deal worth around $8 million. The Phillies move quietly. They're not the Yankees, right? The Yankees, I feel like anytime they sniff something, they're attached to a player. They're not the who's another team? The Blue Jays, for example, we were just talking about. The Blue Jays, you know who they're in on and who they're out on. The Dodgers, you know who they're in on and who they're out on. And I'm not saying it's necessarily a bad thing one way or another. Like, I don't think that matters because I think people in league circles know who wants him. Right? I'm just talking about public perspective. But we are the public, right? We are the fan base. So it's important to remember that there are things going on that we do not hear about, that we do not think about, that we may not consider an option that could still make things happen. So as Kyle Tucker and Garrett Crochet go off the board, I'm a little bit troubled by what I'm seeing in these reports about players that are offered and deals that didn't get it done. And then I remind myself, like, hey, Dave Dombrowski knows what he's doing. He is a future Hall of Famer. He is making magic happen year in and year out for this team as far as giving them opportunities to acquire great players. Now, it doesn't always work out, but he's always going to be active to some extent. And this offseason seems more active than he has been in years. So I don't know. I think I'm still erring on the side of he knows what he's doing. Things will work out. I'm not feeling like, oh, hope is lost. I'm hitting the panic button on the Phillies offseason yet. It seems like some people are there. So everybody take a deep breath. And we will go ahead and give them their time to try and make the deals that they can. You can't evaluate a roster in December, all right? Can't evaluate one in January, February. March, when we get there, that's when we start to take a look at everything, all right? So everyone hold your horses when it comes to evaluating the Phillies offseason just because 2 trades got done. Coming up next, we're going to talk about some new options or some other options that may have existed before that the Philadelphia Phillies can look at with Kyle Tucker off the board and with Garrett Crochet off the board, just to give you an idea of if there are other places the Phillies are looking right now. And I think there are. So we'll talk about what they could be coming up as we wrap up today's episode. Let's talk about game time, though. The holidays right around the corner. You know, it would be a great gift. Tickets to a great event, right? Experiences always better than just material things, at least in my opinion, and in Game Time's opinion. And the best part is you don't have to pre-plan everything. This isn't like, wow, it's Christmas, we got to order something 20 days in advance. No, Game Time, you could get deals on seats right up until the start of the event. And they also have this new feature, right? So Game Time picks make getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. They filter out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. They've got all kinds of awesome features to make it easy, all in pricing, which means you get to see your whole price up front, not any hidden fees at the end. Seat views, you get a panoramic view from your seats before you purchase the tickets. They got the lowest price guarantee. 110% of the difference will be paid to you if you find seats in the same row and section for less than what you see on Game Time. And your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. They got baseball, basketball, football, hockey, all the big major sports Now, baseball, not right now, but when baseball season rolls around, they've got concerts, comedy, theater, all of that great stuff. It's a great place to get experience gifts for the holidays. And plus, you can take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time and download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? Yeah, I know it's Christmas time, but it's also always game time. All right, let's discuss some other options for the Philadelphia Phillies. And we're just talking through some base level stuff. I'm not going to break everything down in this episode because we've already gone a little bit long about Kyle Tucker and Garrett Crochet. But who are some other names out there? We mentioned Cody Bellinger earlier on in the episode. He's a guy that is a potential player to acquire for the Philadelphia Phillies in the outfield. Now, it sounds like the Yankees are interested in Cody Bellinger because obviously Juan Soto goes to the New York Mets. See, this is what I'm talking about with the domino effect, right? Like Bellinger could have been a fit for the Phillies, but you see Soto go away from the Yankees. If Soto had gone to the Yankees, well, then maybe Bellinger would be more interested in the Phillies because the Yankees would be out, or maybe the Mets would be in on him then. And then because the Cubs acquire Kyle Tucker, then it's less likely that Cody Bellinger ends up back in Chicago. So now, is it the Yankees? Could the Phillies be interested? Like all of this stuff changes with every single move that gets made. Everything has a ripple effect across baseball. So that's why you have to keep an eye out for stuff. And that's why things are constantly changing. And that's why new opportunities pop up. Bellinger's a name to keep an eye on. Of course, you could still figure out the Alex Bregman thing as far as signing him. And that would be a splash signing for the Philadelphia Phillies. It would be. Trust me. That's a star player. He's a guy that would make an impact here. I don't know how much better he makes the team if you lose Bohm and Castellanos over a trade to clear space. But I know Alex Bregman is a winner. I know he's a great baseball player. The teams that are interested for Alec Bohm, I keep bringing up two teams, Kansas City, Seattle. Surprising rotation depth. That is the profile of teams that would be interested in, teams the Phillies would be interested in trading Alec Bohm to. So Logan Gilbert, is he a guy in Seattle that you could see the Philadelphia Phillies trade Alec Bohm for? Absolutely. Kansas City has a host of starting pitchers that you could look at them trading Alec Bohm for. Like, okay, those are some options. And you might say, well, those aren't premier organizations. Do some research into the guys on those on those staffs the past year. They had sneaky great pitching rotations in Kansas City and in Seattle. So still suitors for Bohm. It seems interesting, though, that the Phillies would look to trade Bohm for an outfielder, which means they still believe that they have options in free agency to acquire a pitcher. Now, something you may notice, right? This is important to take a look at. Painter wasn't mentioned in any of these talks, even though Aiden Miller and Justin Crawford were mentioned. In the major league side, Ranger Suarez was not mentioned in the offer for Kyle Tucker, even though Alec Bohm and Nick Castellanos were. I don't think the Phillies are trying to give up pitching. I think the trade pieces are Bohm and Castellanos. I don't think Ranger's going to move. I do think they're going to add, but the fact that you're hearing them comfortable saying, hey, Alec Bohm and Nick Castellanos, we made an offer to move them for an outfielder, means that pitching help could also come from free agency. So who are some of the other big name free agents? Well, Max Fried is off the board. Roki Sasaki is probably going to the Dodgers. Like, you can basically pencil that one in already. Blake Snell is off the board, already gone to the Dodgers. So Luis Severino's off the board. He's going to the Oakland Athletics. There are a bunch of names that are already coming off the board, but there are guys out there that we talked about. Jack Flaherty, that could be a guy. There are plenty of free agent starters that you could look at, and we're going to continue to break them down as we get less news at some point in the offseason. Obviously, the winter meetings has jumped everything up when it comes to level of intensity of talks, but it seems that the Phillies are open to adding pitching through free agency in addition to potential trades. So either way that can happen, can work. They wouldn't be comfortable moving Bohm if they didn't believe they could fill a spot in the rotation in free agency and also that third base spot. So Nolan Arenado is a guy who's still out there, who's a potential target for the Philadelphia Phillies at third base. Now, there are other teams that are interested in Arenado. I believe Houston has been linked to Arenado since they're expecting that Bregman will not be back. So, again, a lot of moving parts, but listen to some of the names I just ran through: Arenado, Flaherty, Bellinger, all of these guys that are potentially available for the Philadelphia Phillies to go out and acquire. And that's not to mention all of those second-tier guys like Anthony Santander, other outfielders that could play, like Jerks and Profar. These different names of guys that are still very much available as we're in the middle of December. So, again, hold your horses on the offseason. The Phillies not in the best spot right now, right? They're not killing the offseason, but they're also not completely losing it either. We got to slow down. We got to give them their time to figure it out. That's all for today's episode. Thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to this in podcast form, or you're hitting that subscribe button on the Locked On Phillies YouTube channel if you're watching this on YouTube. I appreciate everyone taking the time to join us on today's episode, and I will talk to you on our next episode of Locked On Phillies.